So, George, you and I have been talking throughout this year about business, about strategy, about strategic thinking, about critical thinking, about all these really important topics. And you've just come back from overseas. I thought it would be good today to talk about international business. And I think it's natural for a lot of entrepreneurs when they're building a business to get caught up in or romanticize about expanding into other markets, particularly Australia being so secluded from the rest of the world. We have this temptation maybe as Aussie entrepreneurs to want to be part of, a bigger village. Let's start with that. And what's your experience been in the international business realm? Because you've worked in some pretty cool places.
Yeah. So just as a bit of background, I've worked in Brazil, I've worked in Indonesia, I've worked in China and Malaysia. And now I've just come back from a 3-week scouting tour in Chile. So you're right. I mean, it's very much romanticized, especially about going overseas. Much of what we teach at university as well also is very one-dimensional. We say you follow step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and and this is how you can kind of succeed in international business. However, the reality of it is a little bit more different. I mean, because you and I have been talking about strategy and strategy formulation, but we've been talking about it in a domestic setting, and you can see how complicated it is. So when we talk about international expansion, we have to add another layer of complexity over that, and that is time, culture, institutions, right? Business practices, so on and so forth, right? So the reality of it is that it is marred with complexity, when we go overseas, especially around the cultural aspects. Some things our way of doing things in Australia might be a little bit different to overseas. And when you don't have that cultural understanding or there's a term called psychic distance, that is the distance between what happens, our interpretation of what happens over there, right? Is long. Then we get confused. Things don't make sense to us. Why is it that they do these business practices like this where we do it like that? So it is complex. It's marred with uncertainty. But however, I'm not only about opportunity seeking, but I'm also about risk management as well. So, I mean, from my experience, it's always good to approach these things optimistically, but also from a realistic perspective. And the one thing that I'd like to tell your audience is that don't expect any kind of quick wins, right? You go for the long term, right?
I remember 2019, February 2019, Dom and I landed in London, 2 Aussie entrepreneurs. We're used to getting stuff done. We go and register a company, really easy, right? Much easier than registering an Australian company. Like, how good is this? Then we go to open up a bank account, and it turns into one of the hardest things we've ever done in business, trying to open up a bank account in the UK as non-resident directors. Nobody would open up a bank account for us. And that leads into many other things. And we start to go on a journey of realizing how different even the smallest things are in a market that's very similar to Australia, yet alone a completely different culture, for example. And that goes to what you're saying, that it's the little things can compound and make a big difference.
It's, these small things are very, very frustrating. I mean, so London, as you said, is from an academic perspective, should be a very easy market to go into. However, you can see these small bits and pieces, and it is a disabler. Not having a bank account basically just kind of says, okay, we need to stop whatever we're trying to do until we have this bank account, which is really a mechanism for us to capture our revenue, right?
Well, we had a VC fund that wanted to pay us, and we didn't have a bank account to be paid, right? The simplest thing, you've got people that want to pay you. And it opens up your eyes as to why crypto appeals to so many parts of the world. I mean, we're very well serviced in Australia from a banking perspective, and we maybe don't. Why would I need to have crypto when I've got excellent banking choices? But it's not like that around the rest of the world, right?
I mean, even, you know, and this is London, the first, you know, this is London, which is the UK, which is a first world country, where, and so forth. But when you even go into the developing world, many parts of the developed world, a lot of things can be done online. You know, we can set up a company here in Australia or in Singapore or in the US or in the UK really online. But then when you enter into, you know, countries such as Indonesia, which was my experience, you know, it took months to set up a company because it had to be done through a notary. You know, there had to be proper, you know, you had to write the constitution. You need to open up a foreign bank account with $50,000 US in it.
50 grand to open up a company, and you need to deposit that 50 in a bank account.
You needed to deposit. No, actually, it was, I think it was either 50,000 US or 500,000 US. I'm not really sure. It was one of those, but either way, you needed to deposit a significant amount of money into a bank account just to open up a foreign-owned entity. I mean, and these sorts of things are, you know, can, you know, really, can really stump you, right? And especially the latency of opening that company. It took us months and months and months, right? I'm not sure what it is now, but I'm talking, you know, 2008, 2009, 2010, right? So, and just understanding the differences in legal codes. You know, we're a common law jurisdiction here in Australia. You know, you go to many parts of the world, it's civil law. I mean, what are the ramifications of that? Well, I mean, from an intellectual property perspective, it's significant, right? So, so you're right in that sense. But you know, this is where it's important to do some research and planning as well. You know, much of this stuff you can do on a desktop analysis here in Australia, and you can do inquiries over the phone and so forth. But you know, you need to still do your research with regards to that, and not go over there starry-eyed, but, you know, but be realistic on what to expect. You know, as we say, you know, we hope for the best, but we plan for the worst, right?
Yeah, for sure. So that's, you know, there's some of the little trivial things that you run into when you're setting up, and just from a corporate structure perspective. The way I think about international or expanding beyond your borders, I think about it in two tranches. So either on the supply side, you're providing a good or a service, and you either want to go and hire people overseas, or you want to source goods from overseas, or it is to fulfill your demand. Or you can go and try to expand your demand from your current country to other countries. I think the demand side is much harder. I think it's much easier to go and source you know, supply from overseas. Then what's your experience?
Yeah, that's always the case, especially when you're buying from overseas. They're you know, big. Remember that when you're supplying, you're actually sending revenue to somebody. So they're very, very accommodating. You're buying off them, right? You're buying a product or service. So they're more than happy, right, to run around and accommodate you. However, but if you're going overseas to extract revenue, then it becomes a little bit more difficult. I mean, how is selling a good or a service? You know, what's the difficulty of selling a good or a service here in the domestic market? I mean, it's quite high. So as I said to you before, you know, I mean, adding that other layer of complexity when you're going overseas, it's even more difficult. Requires a lot of upfront work. It requires multiple visits. And it requires a significant amount of trust as well in doing that. You know, these things don't happen in a vacuum. You're going to be reliant on people over there. And, you know, this is where partners and employees and trust and managing from afar becomes really, really important. Right? And this is where there's particular mechanisms that you can try and instill. However, you know, it requires a certain degree of experience and a certain degree of nous to kind of master the international business field?
In 2008, I was working for an Australian investment company, and we were acquired by Morningstar, which was a big US funds research business. And I was fresh into the workforce, a few years in, didn't really understand why they paid such a big price for a business that seemingly didn't really have many moats, right? Or it was a people business. But then you start to realize that exactly what you said, going into new markets to try to capture demand, to try to take money out and sell into, it explains why a lot of multinationals go out and acquire businesses when they want to enter into new markets, because often it's a lot easier and cheaper than them trying to do it themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And you having a pre-made footprint in a particular country just kind of alleviates many of those issues of what we call those brownfield investments, as opposed to what we call a greenfield, which you kind of you develop from the ground up. There are those advantages of both, right? However, the brownfield investment is really, for a multinational, works really well because you've already got a footprint, you've already got, the mechanisms, the processes and procedures in place, and you can just kind of gradually integrate your organization into theirs, and then basically, roll that into the overall group. Makes market entry a lot easier. However, that's for multinationals who have a lot of money, right? For the startup, I mean, it really depends on what it is that you're doing, a product or a service. However, international expansion, especially from a services perspective or even from a tech perspective now, is a significantly easier path than what it used to be traditionally. The Internet of, there's a whole discipline that has been created inside the umbrella of international business studies for these new, for the emergence of tech companies and how they internationalize overseas. So it's a lot easier, but still the fundamentals remain the same, and basically one of the key areas is partner selection over there. Always you're not 100% virtual, so, and you're always going to need people over there. So it's finding the right people, just like it is here in Australia, or just like in any other domestic economy. Finding the right people becomes absolute key.
So I can ask you to tell me about a lot of different markets, but I'm going to ask you about Latin America because you've just come back from there. Yeah. And Latin America is a market that's close to me because our business Wealthy is focusing on the Latin American market. Yeah. What's your conviction? Having come back, having spent time, got a feel for the market and the demographics and the geopolitics, where do you think that continent goes next? And who are your top choices in that market?
So just as a bit of background, I went to Chile for 3 weeks. But I also managed to go to Buenos Aires, Argentina, for 4 days. During the first week of my visit over there, and you could tell the difference. You could feel the economic issues in Buenos Aires. I mean, Argentina's been in the news for quite some time now. They've just elected a new president who's looking to really revolutionize the country, for better or for worse, however you want to interpret it.
No, but let's not understate that. This is a guy that wields a chainsaw and wants to murder leftists, right? That's not an exaggeration. That's literally what he's talking about doing. So that's the extent that it's reached there, right? But go ahead about Argentina.
Yeah. So he's kind of, from a rhetoric perspective, he's like kind of a Donald Trump on steroids, right? So, but you could see the poverty just on the streets of Buenos Aires, and so on and so forth. Now, I happened to fly out on the Monday there, where the day after the actual elections itself. So I kind of got a snapshot of what was happening over there. However, Chile was a little bit different, I think. Chile is very rich in resources. It's almost akin to Australia. It's very resource rich, both from a commodities perspective and a soft commodities. They have lots of mining, especially around lithium, copper, and so forth. A very big aquaculture industries in the south. A very small population. I think it's about 20 million. So and from my experience, I look at the visual markers. What kind of cars people drive, the prices of things, especially around meals and supermarkets and so forth. Just to give you an example, Argentina in Buenos Aires, an 800, at a restaurant in a very ritzy area, an 850 gram T-bone steak cost, I think it was $14 Australian.
Wow.
Yeah.
That'll cost you what, $200-$300 for an Aussie restaurant?
Yeah, in Australian restaurant, they might cost you about maybe $120 or something like that. In Santiago, it was the same as well as Australian prices. So something like that in Santiago would have probably cost you about $100, maybe $130.
And these countries are literally next door, right? Territorial, they share a territorial boundary.
They do share, yeah, that's right. So Argentina is the larger of the two, but they're long, elongated countries that go from sort of the bottom third of Latin America and all the way down to Antarctica.
So it sounds to me, having listened to your description, you've got the United Arab Emirates, and then you've got the Arab countries around it, and that's the exception. That's the wealth hub. Yeah. You've got Singapore, and then your Thailand, Vietnam, Laos around it, right? It sounds like Chile is that economic hub with the rest of the countries around it still trying to figure out their space. Was that fair, or is Uruguay a close second? Well,
Uruguay, from what people were telling me over there, is that it's attractive because of the tax rate. A lot of the conversations over there was about tax and so forth, and Uruguay's kind of positioned itself from a low tax perspective. However, I mean, I was really impressed by the caliber of individuals and entities in Chile, especially around the tech and the tech space. In Santiago itself, there's 4 WeWork. I think there's 3 WeWorks. And I managed to meet up with a lot of startup businesses over there, and some of the products, some of the services, or some of the businesses and the technology that they've produced is quite well. I wouldn't say world leading, but it's on par with what we have in the world. So and the universities produce a lot of high caliber students, especially around the computer sciences and the other sorts of STEM courses, right? So
I think listening to that, it's a perfect example of how countries first use tax as a competitive advantage, but then later what we're seeing, particularly over the past 20 or 30 years, it's the ecosystem they build around that tax advantage that then takes them to the next level. Hong Kong has always had an attractive tax regime, but Singapore has also and is now, a financial hub, a trading hub, and you start to see the changes where it's not just about tax. I mean, the US isn't very tax friendly, but Silicon Valley is the innovation hub. Why? Not because of tax, but because of the ecosystem, the people, the drive, the culture, the taste for business.
Yeah, and there is that, and each one of those countries has those capabilities. However, what drew me to Chile was actually the people that are eventually are our joint venture partners over there. So, over a year ago, there was a particular individual who came from Chile, whose entity over there produces software, high-end software, and that was really the draw card. And that's one of the things that really, that's the primary reason, right? And I mentioned that before around partner selection. So these countries are fantastic, but at its fundamental level, right? You need to be partnering with the right people over there. And when you go overseas, right, you know, you need to spend a lot of time up front making sure that you've got the right partner, right, or the right partners, and creating the network and ecosystem as well in order to ensure that, you know, that you have the best chances of success. And in and amongst that also is, you know, things like Austrade, right? Talking to trade representatives, not only from the state, but also from Austrade and so forth. And they really help you out. I mean, that's their job, right? So yeah.
Yeah, look, just on that, and we're getting towards the end, but I think that's an important point for an entrepreneur that doesn't have that ecosystem, wouldn't know the difference between person A or person B in a market that they want to expand in. You raise an important point that a lot of times we have resources, particularly in Australia, being a world leader, developed country. We have Australia, we have Trade New South Wales. We've got a lot of resources. How do you tap into those? How does somebody tap into those? Is it just, do you need to know people? Do you need to qualify? Or is it open for everyone?
You don't need, you know, it is their job to help businesses, Australian businesses, export their goods or services to a particular country, right? So the first thing I would do is actually find out who are your trade representatives in a particular country, reach out to them, tell them what you're planning on doing. And my experience has always been that they are more than willing to help. You know, their KPIs basically are tied to your success. And if they can show that they're actually doing that, that there is an opportunity for you, and they're able to show, I think that'll work very much in your favor. So you just have to find out who they are and then reach out to them. And my experience has been, and especially now, you know, dealing with Austrade in Chile, I found them to be very, very engaging, very, very helpful. And they proposed and even introduced us to some potential clients, you know, in just in that first 3 weeks. So I mean, don't be afraid to go out and ask, and also talk to the trade office of the particular economy you're going to as well.
Yeah,
they might have, you know, from a networking perspective, no meeting is useless, right? And no contact, right, shouldn't be, you know, every contact you can think of should be approached. I mean, that's the best way to do it. And just line up as many meetings as possible. And one of the practical tips is to do a scouting tour, to do a few scouting tours, you know, just to kind of get familiar before you actually rush into anything, right? And you have to use your normal business smarts even when you go overseas, right? No? Yeah, just like you would when you're choosing a partner here in Australia. I mean, those kinds of, you know, the values that you have, you know, honesty, integrity, information sharing, so on and so forth, are the same, and it should be the same anywhere you go, right?
Yeah. Final question, really serious question. Did you bump into any Assyrians while you were in?
No, there wasn't any. There was a few. There was one guy. There was a few Assyrians in actually Argentina.
Yeah.
But however, after a few generations, they kind of blended into the Arabic community that then blended into the Argentinian community. But no, it didn't. Not in Chile anyway. It's quite surprising that both countries are very multicultural. You know, that I went to the south. I went to the Patagonia in Chile, and I went to a town called Puerto Varas, right, which is right at the bottom of where the Chilean landmass stops and those chain of islands begin. And it looked like something out of a Bavarian town. So these countries are very, very multicultural, right? And you can see that as well in the complexion of a lot of people.
Well, if you're a Syrian and you're in South America and you're listening to this, reach out. We want to know you. We want to meet you the next time we're there. But George, to put a bow on what's been, I think, a pretty good year, I want to say thank you for jumping on the podcast. Thank you for being a friend and a mentor. and a colleague for me, and sharing your wisdom with our listeners. And I'm sure we're going to be working a lot closer in 2024.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity, Peter, and look forward to catching up with you again.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.